Hello and welcome to FTSE Funds and Finance, the straight talking podcast brought to you by Goodwin Financial Services. I'm joined once again by independent financial advisors Steve Goodwin and Josh Goodwin. How are we doing, gentlemen?
Yeah, good yourself?
Not too bad, thank you. So today we're going to talk about credit card debt or debt and debt consolidation. It's a hot topic at the moment. It's one that is probably on the lips of everybody or a lot of households. As we know, in November, the stats come out, there's the highest credit card debt since 2004, so the highest in 20 years. And just to give you some figures before we move on, in November there was an additional 1.5 billion in all forms of consumer credit added, and 1.2 million of that was credit card, 317 million were things like car finance and personal loans. Gents, people are being squeezed in all different directions, inflation, interest rates. Obviously, we can see that people are getting into a little bit of bother. That's why credit card has soared. What's the best methods or the best strategies for people that are in debt and the things that they can do?
You've got to start getting a budget planner together, listing down all your expenses, and then breaking those expenses down into what are optional and what are mandatory, such as bills or going down to the pub, going to the cinema.
Yeah.
Going on holidays, and if you're overspending and that's why you're going into your credit card, just start looking, where can we cut back? Mm-hmm. That'd be the first step. The other step would be, if you've got credit cards on high interest rates, can you do a balance transfer to maybe 0%? Mm-hmm. And then that can start giving you an idea of how to potentially save some money, start paying your debts down, and try and reduce the pressure you have with high interest rates. Mm-hmm. That'd be the first place to start, and then that would give somebody potentially the options of getting it sorted out. And then the other, what we were talking about, if the other option people can have potentially, if they own a property, they can potentially debt consolidate, which is it's got its pros, but it's got its cons as well. But it does help other people sometimes drastically, because what it does effectively puts all their debts onto the mortgage, spreads out up to 35, 40 years potentially on a interest rate. That's usually been historically low for a long time. Even now, it's still quite low compared to what some credit cards could be. And then you reduce your debt over the long term, and then you free up the credit cards and the loans on the high interest. But then what happens not a lot of the time, but does happen, is the credit cards and loan facilities have been reset, and then people start going and using them again, and then the spiral's out of control, and then it's a ticking time bomb. So that's the real danger. If you can't get your finances under control, debt consolidation just makes the problem worse and increases the debt you have.
Absolutely. So debt con can be a solution, but if you don't dealing with the root cause of it and the behaviours behind it, then obviously it can cause some bigger issues, is like you said. Talking about the budget planner, Stephen, and to put it in a format that maybe people can understand it a little bit more. Obviously, everyone understands what a budget planner is. I always think of a budget planner a little bit like when you go on a diet. When you go on a diet, you have to track your calories, you have to see what's going in and what you're going out. And a budget planner is effectively that.
Exactly that. And, whilst it's not, for friends and close people, I've sat there and done it for them. Mm-hmm. It's not something as a financial advisor that we do. We tend, and without being disrespectful, we tend to deal with people who have money rather than people who have not. But we have helped plenty of people. I have helped plenty of people throughout my time, and it's really about people. You're saying to somebody, you're spending this amount of money on, on going out for two meals a week or 2 takeaways a week. And then you say you need to cut back, and they go, "Oh, I don't really want to cut back on that. I don't really want to cut back on that." And you see them spiraling out of control. So unless it's like somebody else sitting there and saying, I want to lose weight, but they're not really motivated to lose weight, or they will be motivated for a month and they'll go back to their old ways. So budget control is a life-changing experience, such as when you lose weight and you need to keep it off. And a lot of people fail in budget planning. But if you can run a correct budget, you can normally solve the problem. The same as if you control what you eat, you can solve your weight problem. But it's the discipline and the knowledge of how to do it. So budget planners are the start. The biggest problems are when people are already so far down the line that a budget planner no longer is going to help them that much. It'll help them a little bit, but it's like when your weight is too far gone and you're about to die because you're so obese, a diet isn't going to work at that stage. Sure. So it's very similar that at the moment, I think it's over 1% of people are already now in mortgage arrears.
Yep.
You've got all the debt that you mentioned there. The problems are starting. So people that find they've got loans apart from a mortgage, because a mortgage is good debt, right?
Yeah.
They need to start looking and saying, well, look, we don't want to be getting loans. We want to save the money so we don't have to loan. And that becomes part of what you do in your budget plan. And it is normally, and I would say this, of the horror stories that you see, a portion of that is self-inflicted
Sure.
by non-control of budget.
Yeah.
And the people that then do that, I'll give you an example, and I'm going back 25 years. I had somebody come to me who wanted help, who was in a real mess. And this person came to my office, and I debt consolidated because it had got totally out of control. Gave them the warning that you must get your budget under control. Done the budget. 2 years later, that same person was back in my office crying, oh my God, I'm in the same position again. And I did it again to get them out of the mess. And 2 years later, back in crying again. By this time, there was no way out.
Sure.
And that person then would then be saying, oh, it's not my fault, it's just life. It was that person's fault because they couldn't stop spending money.
Mm-hmm.
And that person would go and say, oh my God, it's terrible, it's everybody's fault, I've had bad advice, I don't know what's saying, I've had this, and that's why I am loath to debt consolidate somebody unless I am really convinced that they've changed their behavioural pattern.
And it's about, I'd say, addressing those issues early. So if someone obviously now looking at the important part is obviously they've got to make sure they look at their finances. They've got to understand the situation they're in. And I'm guessing, gentlemen, the earlier they spot it, it goes without saying, the better that they can.
They're in less of a deep hole, aren't they? If you start looking at your finances sooner. If you're starting to max out your credit cards or take out loans to cover personal expenses, at that point you should think, why are we doing this? Where are we spending our money? I understand, especially in the last 12 months with different inflationary issues, everything's gone up, your energy, your food. But at some point you can't just keep borrowing more and more money. Eventually it goes pop. Even you've seen, sorry to go a bit political, but even now you're seeing with government borrowing,
Yep.
You're seeing that taking such a lot, the repayments taking up such a large part of the annual budget that people are now talking about debt being an issue. Where you go back 2 or 3 years ago, people saying, "Oh yeah, you need to spend. Government's borrowing money to spend is okay." Eventually, you run out of the facility to do it, or your expenses taken up so much by debt. The only way you carry on living is by borrowing more.
Absolutely, yeah. So the amount to cover your debts coming in takes all your disposable income, and then obviously you're having to borrow to then just live, and it gets things. And there's always that fear of judgment from people, isn't there, as well? People worry about being judged. This is a more common problem than people probably realise. Everyone always thinks it's themselves, but it's important to get onto it early, as we said before. We obviously, Josh, when you talked about there in a situation where you're debt consolidating, because obviously at that point there is no disposable incomes. The plus side is obviously it reduces your monthly outgoings, and obviously the interest rate is probably better than what you get in a credit card and loan. Can you just touch on what the cons are there? I know you said obviously you can think, but obviously does it cost more over because you're spreading it over a longer period of time? What's the
potentially? Yeah, you'd have to when you're doing, you have to go through certain procedures to make and do the calculations. But when you're paying a debt over 25, 30, 35, or even 40 years, rather than 2-3 years maybe, you're paying the debt over a lot longer period of time. So a lot of the time you'll end up paying more interest payments in the mortgage rather than the loan.
That's the part, Steve, I think that people miss, isn't it? Debt consolidation is always, you always hear the plus side of it of, you put it on the mortgage, you reduce things. But as Josh was saying there, it can spread over a longer period of time.
Massive negatives, because it always means you pay more interest, always. So the best thing to do is to try and work out if you can repay the loan debt back from cutting other expenditure, reducing to 0% interest, restructuring the loans. Because the problem is what you can do, the smartest way to do it, people wouldn't do it, is debt consolidate it but pay the same amount of payments off the mortgage. So in effect the loan will be paid back quicker. Now, if you follow me, so
Sure.
so you could restructure the loan over 25 years, but pay that additional loan bit back over 4.
Yeah.
But human nature, they won't do it.
Sure.
So you know that you can say, we'll do this and it's cheaper, but everybody's individual. But we still go back to the fact, doesn't matter how you want to restructure paying your loans, unless you're going to have a change of behaviour and a change of everything, it's never going to change. And you get situations where you'll have one partner blaming the other one.
Sure.
And it's both of them normally. It can be one, but generally it's a unit. It's a joint thing. And you get some clients that run their budgets brilliantly, others that don't. Others you can educate, and they will adhere to it, and others they don't. So debt is how you approach debt. Is you've got to deal with the proximate cause, and the rest of it is pretty much neither there nor there. Debt consolidation is normally used at a point of last resort where you can't make or meet your payments, but it has to be met by a change in behaviour.
Yeah.
And I would say, and I don't know the numbers, I would bet 80 to 90% of time it is not met by a change of behaviour.
Sure. And like you say, budget plan is one of the ways they can address that. If you are struggling with debt, obviously getting advice is the key part. There is a government national debt helpline that's really important. That'd probably be the first point of call for anybody that needs any advice if it's got to a point where you're starting to struggle. And it's important, as we said before, to try and get advice as early as possible. I'll give you the number for that. I will put it up in the description of the video as well. But that is 0808 808 4000. That's 0808 808 4000. That is the government's national debt line. So if you are having any problems and need some advice, that could be a good point of call. Gentlemen, I think that's covered majority of the situation. So thank you very much. And if you've got any other subjects you'd like us to cover, then please comment or get in touch with us, info@goodwin-financial.co.uk, and I'll put it to the guys and we can hopefully get some questions for you. Gentlemen, thank you again, and we'll catch you next week.